Hello, this is Dave Sugarbaker, and today is the 15th day of March, 2026. And I have a sermon here called The Only Way Out. The scriptures from Revelations. This is from the 21st chapter, verses 1 to 4. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them as their God. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away." My father was an English professor and my mother was a librarian, so words are important to me. I had no choice in the matter. That's just how it came out. I want to talk today about a ubiquitous process. And here's the definition of ubiquitous. It's ever-present, pervasive, universal, wide-ranging, far-reaching, perhaps inescapable. The writer of Revelations knows this process and dreams that in God's new kingdom, it will be gone. It'll be edited out of the picture. The ubiquitous process is grief. The process of coming to terms with loss and change. Grief is one of the most universal human processes, or the universal human experiences. It's, I thought about this, and I've thought about grief an awful lot over the years, and I think the only way to avoid grief is to love nothing and to love no one. Part of the picture of the ideal new world in Revelations is that there will be no more death, no more loss of any kind, and God will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more. Rosemary Tromer writes about grief. On Earth, just a teaspoon of neutron star would weigh 6 billion tons. 6 billion tons equals the collective weight of every animal on Earth, including insects, times 3. 6 billion tons sounds impossible until I consider how it is to swallow grief. Just a teaspoon, and one might just as well have consumed a neutron star. How dense it is, and how it carries inside it the memory of collapse. How difficult it is to move, then how impossible to believe that anything could lift that weight. There are many reasons, Rosemary Tromer says, to treat each other with great tenderness. And one is the sheer miracle that we are here together, on a planet surrounded by dying stars. Another is that we cannot see what anybody else may have swallowed. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, working with hospice patients in 1969, studied grief and identified facets of the process of coming to terms with loss. Some very smart people have been living and working with Kubler-Ross's grief model and how it works in human life in the intervening half-century. Her original 5 facets have become maybe 6 or 7, and there's a caution that we don't turn the stages of grief into some kind of recipe that fits all situations. The facets of grief, worked and reworked over the last 50 years, begin with shock and denial. Then, as reality sets in, there's anger and bargaining. There can be a lot of pain and guilt involved, depending on the situation. And when things become bleakly real, Depression becomes part of the process. These facets alternate by the minute and by the hour and by the day. And then, at some moment down the line, there is an upward turn. And we start reaching out to others. We want to tell the story. And finally, we struggle to find meaning in the loss or the change that has happened to us. We can't be too specific about how one should grieve properly. With most things that involve human beings, there are 100 different right ways, personal, unique, right ways to do this grieving process. As we grieve the loss of somebody we love, we can see love looking for a new way of expressing itself. Because, remember Paul defining the characteristics of love? One of those characteristics is love never ends. We live in a world in which one of our few certainties is that things will change. Whatever is today, tomorrow is going to be different. And we don't like change very much. We human beings are creatures of habit, and when life changes, it means we have to put in new work to adjust to the new situation. The old habits just won't work with the new life situation. Sometimes we try to ignore the new developments so that we don't have to put in the effort to develop new habits. Instead of doing our grief work, we put it on a high shelf in the back of our closet and pretend that it's not there. If this is our pattern of dealing with life's small and large losses, over decades that closet gets filled up and overfilled with grief we have not wanted to face. Something I learned dealing with grieving people at hospice: when a new loss comes along, old losses, the ones that we've been working so hard to ignore, come back for a new visit. It gets harder and harder to keep them all tucked away in the closet. Anderson Cooper and Stephen Colbert talked candidly in a CNN interview about their struggles with grief and loss. Anderson Cooper said that for decades, he never allowed himself to grieve the loss of his father and his brother, who were lost in a plane crash. Instead, he focused on being the strong one for his mother. And he later realized that burying grief also buries joy. If we try to avoid or postpone dealing with our losses, we wind up tiptoeing through life, carefully avoiding loss. Even one more loss might be too much for us, and all those old losses will come tumbling out of the closet at the same time. Terry Ott, the editor of the magazine The Presbyterian Outlook, says, to find our way of healing and hope, we must be willing to go deep. Wounds do not heal unless they are touched. And no, despite our best attempts, those wounds are not healed by distraction or denial or by retail therapy. Ott says, resurrection is not a shortcut around grief. It is God's declaration that grief, fully felt and fully heard, can open into new life. At hospice, one of the things we learned was that when it comes to dealing with grief, the only way out is through. Grief will not be ignored. It will not be rationalized away. It will not be tiptoed around. Isaiah and the psalmist talk about joy, but this isn't superficial giddiness. This is joy that's tempered by having dealt with the great weight of grief. Having swallowed that teaspoon of a neutron star, finally we find that we can stand relatively straight again. There's a certain deep joy that may come paradoxically out of grief. We may come to understand the depth of love that grief reveals. Sorrow and joy may not be opposites. As we deal with loss and grief, sorrow and joy may be intertwined. For all that has been, help us, O God, to say thanks. And for all that will be, help us to say yes. Change is built into our world, and we can't greet tomorrow with deep joy unless we're willing to grieve the losses of today. Now, God bless you. If that's been valuable to you, I'm so happy to find that to be so. If you find value in this, I'd appreciate it if you'd pass it along. Keep safe. Be well. God bless you. See you soon.